and then I'll put it on the Facebook. Then I have my scheduled rants, and I'll but pre-recording the pod, I'll tell you about Watchmen, because we got over because the issue was the children dying in the first episode a while back.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do a button here. I think we're live. Oh, so Matt, headed over to the Vinyl Preacher Facebook page. The new, the new Facebook thing is really bad, Matt. I want to post. This is my daggone, I swear to God, I hate the internet. I did just order Jared, whatever his name is, book about 10 reasons that you should get off of social media.
I don't know that one.
Yeah, I mean, it says a lot of things that
I believe it.
I believe, right?
I can believe it, but not do it.
Yeah. We'll see if he can convince me. I mean, right. I'm pretty close, I think, because students aren't on Facebook at all. Anymore. Like that's been kind of true for 5 years. For next week, but now it's true. Like none of my current students are on Facebook. I mean, there are, but they're not,
Right. Yeah. Honestly, at this point, I just want to share my pictures beyond a little family group chat.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, not share them so widely. You know what I mean? And I don't know what the sweet spot is in the middle there. I wish there was like a social, like, here are people that I actually know in real life that I could just kind of be like, hey, here's some pictures I took. But that it's not like, but all the other stuff, yeah, like I retweet stuff all the time, but I'm increasingly aware of how incredibly pointless it is.
I don't believe you, because you do an awful lot of article sharing.
I do, but I know how incredibly pointless it is. Like every time I go, why am I doing this?
I'm like, oh, I bet that's a good article. Then I just keep scrolling.
Yeah. Yeah, like this article in NPR about Kenosha where it was like deep racial disparities existing over generations. But lots of people are posting pictures of mostly white people painting murals that say love on them. And this is our response to generations of really extreme, like racial inequities in Kenosha that are worse than Milwaukee and Chicago even. But don't worry, because we just painted a mural. Hashtag Kenosha strong. Like, oh my gosh. It was just, the article was everything. But nobody that needs to read it will read it. So why am I even,
Speaking, Matt, of historical racial disparities and inequities, I did finally just complete watching The Watchmen, which starts with the Tulsa Massacre, Tulsa race riots, if you will, Tulsa on Black Wall Street, which Chris had to love. Has Chris seen it?
Oh, like we were not even going to watch this show because it's like superhero show. It's supposed to be pretty dark, and then I was like, hey, it looks like the first episode has the Tulsa race riots. And she goes, oh, well, let's check it out. And then we were hooked. So that was the hook for us.
I mean, so I just finished. So I'm going to try to avoid spoilers here. But first of all, I want to make it really clear. My first note upon finishing this, loved it. Right? It was great. It required a little bit of Games of Thrones-iness. Like when I first got into Games of Thrones, like I had the family tree like in front of me so that I could figure out who these people were. And I needed a little more context than I had like naked going into it. So I started listening to I did a little bit of Wikipedia, which I stumbled into a couple spoilers, but not that bad. But once I got enough context, then it was like, what is happening? This is insane. My only critical note, Matt, is it towards the back half of the season, it started to drag a little bit because they did so much exposition through flashback. And so you would have like an entire episode where the plot didn't advance. It didn't feel like the plot advanced at all. Like we learned a lot. Because like I'd read the Wikipedia article for an hour, but nothing had happened in the show. So that was...
Right, yeah.
That's my only note.
That's true. I mean, there's like a lot of, there were a lot of deep dives, but I don't know. I think I mean, it's been a couple months. when did that end? I can't remember, but it feels like it's been
Started like last
years.
fall, I feel like, which
like
is
it's been-
around 700 years ago.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I just distinctively remember the one episode, which probably was all flashbacks, but the origins of the black superhero, right? Where he
Hooded
like
Justice.
just that whole episode was just
Yeah.
like, I can't believe I'm watching this, that somebody made this, wrote this, like fit this into an hour of like it contained multitudes. And I was like, this is everything. My jaw was on the floor at the end of that episode.
I thought the ending was really good. I really appreciated the ending.
What happened? Cliffhanger. And they're
I
not gonna
know.
make another one because he's like, no, I said
Yeah.
everything I need to say.
Yeah, that's unacceptable. Number one. I mean, and I was not a Lost person, Matt.
Yeah.
I got mad at Lost 2 episodes in, where I was like, I saw it and was like, oh, they're not going to tell us the answers to this until the end. So I'll just wait to the end. And then I didn't care. So, but that was great. I mean, I really want another one. And if he denies it to me, that sucks. Jerk.
Yeah.
Shall we record a podcast, man?
Sure.
Let's do it. I hope that we're sampling at 48K. I don't really know what that means, but I think it means we get to use Zoom. If not, Nick, we're sorry.
Welcome to the Vinyl Preacher, your weekly podcast where we talk about the Bible and make a playlist. We exclusively do those two things. I'm Matt Cato, pastor at St. Mark's Lutheran Church in Los Angeles, California.
And as it was written in the Bible, I am Zach Paris, pastor of Luth. I don't want to do anything besides talk about the Bible or make a playlist. And so I will quote Zechariah 34:15, where it says that I'm Zach Paris, the pastor of Lutheran Campus Ministry at the University of Colorado Boulder.
Is that who you're named for? The prophet Zechariah?
The prophet Zechariah, to remember in Hebrew, God remembers is what Zachary means in the Hebrew.
Very nice.
Zakar, to remember.
Oh.
Do you know what I learned how to do this week, man? Students
What
are
did you learn
back.
how to do?
Students are back. They're on campus. We're going to keep doing this. I would like to share some information with you this week that I've learned. The gold standard, Matt, for colleges that have students on campus and testing is the University of Illinois. Your beloved Illini are the gold standard.
I actually thought for a second you were going to talk about the gold standard as like a matter of currency, because who knows what we're going to talk about in this podcast. I never know going in, but you're not. You're using it as a metaphor. So
I'm using
continue.
it as a metaphor. Next
Continue.
week, we will talk about the gold standard and why we should bring it back. The gold standard is University of Illinois. They require all students are tested twice a week with a saliva spit test, which is more of a screening than a test, but it's helpful. They require it of students who live on campus and off campus. To date, since like the middle of August, they have done over 182,000 tests. They have done over 182,000 screenings. And that number is astronomical compared to the University of Colorado, where we are requiring once a week for students who live on campus, which is a small fraction of the 30,000 students who are on campus. To date, since the middle of August, we have done just over 4,700 tests, Matt. That's a much smaller number than 182,000. I have an engineering degree, so
yeah,
I've crunched the numbers on this.
I was wondering, so I'm glad you could do that for us.
Yep, I got it. So things should go great. We have no idea where this deadly virus is on our campus, though it's certainly here and around us. Everything will be great. I think we might need more testing on campus and in our society. No.
I heard that we're just going for herd immunity, though. So we're just
That sounds
going
great.
to sacrifice as many people as needed.
Everybody has said everything's gone so well in Sweden with their attempt at herd immunity that has resulted in mass casualties. So everything's going to be great. It's gonna be great. Students are back, Matt. So we're having to figure out what it means for us to be the church and to do what we do, which is not
Yeah.
really worship. Students are desperately starved of human connection. And that's worth taking into account. I really have heard that over the past 6 months from my alumni who aren't at home with parents and don't have like families and aren't stressed out and oversaturated with humans the way that you and I might be. So it is important, like they're really starved to see other people. And so we're doing dinner on Tuesday nights. We're not doing a program, so it's just the meal. It's all outside. We have this really lovely big open space at St. Aidan's that we use. And it's been going pretty well. But all the food has been prepackaged, though I don't know that we need to be too worried about. I haven't heard much about like it being transmitted via food. You haven't heard of like people eating in a restaurant and getting it because of the food, but it's the aerosols and stuff. But just to be precautious, we are serving like it's kind of grab and go style. We have all the compostable boxes that you pick up. And Matt, we have identified the best food for these times. And that is, of course, it's kind of prepackaged on its own, the empanada. And in town, just at the bottom of the hill from where we meet from campus is Cafe Argentino, where we, over the years, have catered empanadas from, and students love them. Because, Matt, an empanada is delicious, right? Like it's real good. And so first week we did it. And then I was like, I've made these before. I bet I can make them. And Matt, Goya, which is a great company, can't say enough positive things about Goya, and in particular their C-class leadership. Goya makes frozen prepackaged empanada discs already cut into circles. $2 for 12, and they're frozen, right? So you can keep them forever. So this week I was like, Megan, what do we do? And we could have ordered more, but it gets kind of pricey. You pay like $4 or $5 an empanada is to feed 20 people is a lot of empanadas and adds up pretty quick. What's a sustainable way? We've always wanted to have a thing that's ours. I've always imagined turning our Tuesday nights into basically like a pop-up restaurant. And so we tried ramen, and that was a lot of work and mediocre results. But I was like, I've made empanadas before. I can do this. So I did it on Monday. I made a ton of fillings. I did a classic, the Argentinians, in Argentina, they love their beef. Classic beef, onion, little red pepper, olive. Then we did a cheese and spinach one that was pretty good. And then I went sweet. I did an apple blueberry, which kind of looked like beets, but tasted delicious because it had a ton of sugar, cooked it down, a little starch, cornstarch. And then, Matt, on Tuesday, Megan and I tied up over 80 empanadas. And so I've gotten really good. I can really like stitch them together. It was a lot of work. So we'll see. I did buy some empanada presses that have arrived now. Amazon couldn't quite get them to me in time.
Okay.
So again, shout out to Amazon and Goya, great companies. But I did it. By the end of, you could see when you got your empanada, you could look at it and tell what part of the day I made that one in. Because if it looked pretty sloppy and you could see the edges, that was one of the first ones. But if it looked really nice, that was the end of the day when I got real good at it. So empanada restaurant
done,
coming to your neighborhood.
Amazing. Wow. 21st century ministry right here. Pop-up restaurants,
empanadas,
eating al fresco. That's what they call it here in LA.
We ate al fresco came. He's a freshman. What's happening over? What's happening in the al fresco part of the world?
Who knows? Who knows what is happening here?
That sounds good.
We're continuing on. Here's the most exciting thing I did this week. We, we're still a hot spot here in Los Angeles. Although, when you read the things that say California has the highest numbers in the country, true, but also like per capita, not actually we have a lot of people. It's like we have a fifth of the country that lives here.
That's unimportant. I thought how many people you have in a state is very unimportant to the state's
be aware
political power
when you hear those things. So this week our COVID reopening team met. I didn't even want to have a team because I was like, we are never meeting in person again. But my council was like, okay, we don't have to meet tomorrow, Pastor Matt. We just need to, but we should probably start thinking about preparing so that we're ready. Okay, fine. Sometimes, pretty much all the time, lay people are right. And so we met, and out of that, I came up with a 3-phase plan. So now I feel like Gavin Newsom, and I'm gonna make my little PowerPoint that's gonna be
Triple
color
phase.
coded. Here's our 3 phases.
You got to Prezi it, man. Don't PowerPoint.
Prezi. Oh my gosh. Well, usually I would keynote it anyway, but I'm a big keynote guy. Yeah. So right now we're in drive-through mode, drive-through blessings. Got a team of volunteers on site, but everybody else moving through. We're not gathering and hanging out in a static way, other than the volunteers. Phase 2, though, worship outside. I'm skeptical of why, like, I don't know. I know other churches are doing it, but me standing out there with a microphone and a big loudspeaker while everybody sits in their cars and I broadcast, the internet exists. Like, I don't understand.
It does exist.
Like, we could just, but I also know that people get bored of the same thing over and over. So I'm like, well, maybe we do that like once a month and it'll mix things up and people can feel like their needs are getting met. So, okay, maybe we'll move toward some kind of outdoor thing. And I was like, phase 3, worship in the sanctuary. Not for a long time. I was like, it's going to be a long time. So, but it was super helpful because when people started, like, when we were first talking about it, people were like, and then in the sanctuary, like, we'll have to like rearrange to have like singers for enough away. And I'm like, we should not even be talking about that. We're not even anywhere close. Because like you said, like, it's not being spread via food. Everything I've read, even with the church hotspots, there don't appear to be a lot of like super spreader events that were outdoor events. Even among protests, it tends to be indoor events that people are holding that are the super spreader events. So the more that we learn about this, just not going to use the sanctuary for a while, but maybe we'll move toward outdoor. Either way, I've got a 3-phase system. I'm excited.
Oh, 3 is a magic number, man. Very magical.
Magic number.
Magical number. Yeah. Yeah, I think asking why is a good reason. Good reason. Good question. A good question, man. Ask why.
Asking why about what?
Why are we gathering right now?
Yeah, I mean,
or why would we gather at this point or that point, you know?
Yeah. It's really interesting. I mean, again, like, I was skeptical of the drive-through things. Then it was like, oh no, this is something valuable. But even there, my team that did it was like, I said, okay, we're gonna do another one in September. And they're like, well, not that many people came. So now I had to like, actually, my council president said, it felt like we did all this work. And then like, not very many people came. And I was like, welcome to my life. Like, this is what every Sunday feels like, like, I just want you to recognize, like, this is, and so you have 2 options. You can either work like crazy on outreach, or you reframe what you're doing and say, every person that comes through matters, and do the outreach that we can. And but
I mean, it's a lot. It's at times I've thought, wow, this is a lot of work to just give away some empanadas, because we set up all the signs that people have to check in with the QR code to so we can do contact tracing. And we've spaced all the tables apart, and the line is really clear, and we got to, by the time it gets served, because we've got to restaurants aren't even the empanada place, who are great people. I know them. They are Argentinian. I'm going to do what I can to not drive them out of business with my very successful pop-up restaurant. They're always great. They deliver. They're fantastic, but they're we can't ask them to pre-individually package all of these things, so we got to do it. And but when you see, I saw this week, we had 15, 20 students after dinner sitting on the ground. This was our learning. People feel closer. 6 feet on the ground feels closer than 6 feet standing up. So people didn't sit in the tables this week, which is interesting and will make my job easier. They were sitting on the ground in a giant circle. All pretty mostly doing a really great job of being really conscientious and stuff. But they had finished eating and they were just talking to each other and like really clear how much they had missed like humans, their own age, right? Who they could, because they've been stuck at home with their parents for 6 months.
Yeah.
So I guess worth it, you know?
Yeah, no, there's value to it. And you know, I keep having to reiterate, I don't think like, okay, let's have an outdoor worship. I don't think there's going to be 100 people that suddenly show up to that. And I don't think there should be. Right. Yeah. So like, either way, like, you know, as a campus pastor, I know this is not new to you, like learning how to like, 20 people, that's solid turnout right there. That's like, when it's on the scale that we were talking about in the pre-roll stuff here of like, you have to prove it every time. 20 is fantastic. Like we proved to 20 people that this is a thing worth doing and come and do. You know, all these people are here because they made the choice to like, I'm going to do something. I'm going to do this. They all decided that at some point, you know, and not 60 years ago. Well, and even right now, like the thing I'm most excited about in my ministry is that we've started a couple of different task forces, which doesn't sound very exciting, but one of them is around community organizing. And there's like 8, 9 people that are like fired up and doing research meetings. And so like, I'm like much more excited about that than, and it's probably a better thing for me to be excited about than how many people showed up on Sunday to sit in the pew, which is usually how I gauge my effectiveness. No matter how much you want to tell me that numbers don't matter, like that is definitely numbers. One of the ways we create ourselves
definitely matter, you know, and they matter, right? Like, but they don't matter necessarily like in terms of like we talk about with students, like we don't want them to be discouraged by, you know, we only have 20 people and like the big evangelicals have 200 people at their thing.
Right.
And we want more people because we think what we have is really cool and like more people should know about it. And when we have more people like when you have 3 people, you're not able to do that belonging piece the way that we can do it when we're at 20 and have like a community that you can feel you're a part of.
Right. Yeah.
I wonder, Matt, I got some traction on the social medias before I quit them this week. I did. You commented on one of my posts this week.
Oh yeah, I did. I didn't see where else that conversation went, but what else happened on that thread?
I mean, I don't know how far it went, you know. It got a lot of, from me, you know, a lot of comments and likes and that kind of stuff. And I heard from a regular listener of the pod, John Fry. Shout out to John Fry, who's doing one of those like DivX-ish sorts of things with Wartburg and is working at is it Trinity in Fort Collins, one of the Lutheran churches in Fort Collins. And he said he brought up my perspective at a staff meeting. I hope that Lita and Michael appreciated that. But I said, you know, like if the church wants me to be like a Sunday school teacher and a pastor on top of all these other like new hats that I'm wearing as a preschool teacher and all these other things, then I'm probably not very interested in your church. I hope that, you know, a couple of years ago, there was a workshop in town, a conference called Killing Sunday School. Perhaps this time period can be a time of discernment for the church and can kill off some things that aren't very important that we've been doing and been feeling like we need to do and reprioritize. Help us find the things that people are passionate about, like your community organizing group. And
we did also start a Sunday school last month. So, you know,
I am agnostic on Sunday school. So
do you want me to argue for Sunday school? Is that what we're...
No, I don't have an argument about Sunday school. You can have it. You can not have it. It's fine.
This is what I want, Zach. I want my children who know the ins and outs of the Elsa and Anna saga. I want them to have some vocabulary with some of these biblical characters in the same way that, like, you know, I had to learn how to put a sentence together, like learn the grammar before I could learn how to write. Like, I do feel like
Yeah.
maybe the biblical literacy thing is trite, but like I was like, man, I wish like there were some decent Disney cartoons of these biblical stories so they'd at least be fluent in some of this. Like we're gonna talk about Exodus today. I don't know how they learn that story without Sunday. I don't know how they do it.
Well, Matt, we should talk to Ben Howard, who is the father of one of my alums, Patrick Howard, who works for Techstars here in town now. But his dad was a producer on VeggieTales. Matt, we should get together with Ben and make it happen.
That would be great.
I didn't learn that
That'd
about
be great.
Patrick for years, and then he was like, "Oh yeah, my dad was on like VeggieTales or whatever," and then like everybody in the room was like,
Fantastic.
"What?"
That's fantastic. I don't know. I don't know what the solution is. I grew up at a really big church that had like all this massive programming, but it was a humongous suburban church.
Yeah.
So I honestly like, it's one of the things I don't know how my kids get that same thing that I got.
I mean, I think like
perfect,
if I had to
but
prioritize what I hoped for my child, you know, biblical literacy would be probably the only thing that I'd really care too much about. Like that'd be really helpful.
Yeah.
To be honest, right now, biblical literacy is not a high priority for me, to be perfectly honest, right? Like,
here's what we're doing. This feels sane. And moral of the story in most of the ministry stories that I tell are my lay leaders are usually right. I'm usually wrong. So they wanted to
they
do
don't
Sunday
tell
school,
you that
and
in
so-
seminary, you know, or I don't think maybe you can't hear it in seminary that like,
Yeah.
oh, you're always going to be wrong, yo. Like you've got great
I know.
ideas, but
I know.
it's going
Here's
to be
what we
really
do.
helpful when you stop listening to yourself.
Worship starts at 10. So we start Sunday school at 9:30. It's really only about 20 minutes because you figure 9:35, 9:55. It's like 20 minutes tops. It consists of tell a story from a children's Bible, or sometimes they'll find a video online. Fine. Just tell the story. Then some kind of activity, but people would keep it really simple. So they're like, draw a picture of Queen Esther. Okay. My kids love that. And then sing a song. And that's it. That's it. It's super simple. And it feels to me like the point is biblical literacy, and they get to see a couple other kids on the screen, and everyone else finds it adorable and great. And this is the thing that I learned from Luther Place in Washington, D.C., was that then instead of doing a children's sermon, we have the kid, there's like a Sunday school moment where the kids basically show like, here's the artwork I drew during Sunday school.
Yeah.
Which is like the kids get to preach, right? So rather than and it's short enough that it doesn't get like, why are we, this is 20 minutes of, you know, recorder concert, but just like, hey, we made some signs, and everyone's like, oh wow, the kids learned something. But it's better than an awkward, painful children's sermon. It works.
We should get like
works.
a children's minister expert on the podcast. I have questions that I'd like to ask in person, because I think if I ask them in person, like I won't sound like as much of a jerk as if I do it on Facebook.
We could get, I was like, who do I know that can do that? Should we get Sarah Sunrise and Run? She can talk about Lizzo and children's ministry. It'd be great.
Works for me. Matt, speaking of increasing biblical literacy in children, I would expect that a story where God is directly involved in the massacre of thousands of civilians would be a great story to begin with.
Absolutely. Do you know, I had a young adult preach on an Exodus story a couple weeks ago, and she began by talking about the Prince of Egypt movie. So this 20-year-old movie, still common.
I don't know that
reference
I've
point.
ever seen it.
Really?
No. Is it got Charlton Heston in it? Or is that different?
No, but the theme song is like Whitney Houston and Mariah Carey. It's like,
really?
I remember I had the soundtrack. Oh man, it's
But you
actually
did
not
at your
bad. It's
big suburban church with your programming.
it's not bad actually. Like, it's been a few years now since I've seen it. I showed it for confirmation once, but it's as if like somebody did like a quality Disney animation version of a biblical story, which like they should do more often, like that aren't like just
should
like
do
the Christian
Joseph.
publishing houses. But yeah, Joseph
Jacob
would be
is
great.
Joseph,
You could
because
totally
it ties
do
up
it.
so nicely at the end, right?
Yeah, you could. Oh my gosh, you could
Mhm.
totally. There's so many you could do, and nobody does them. I don't know if they just don't want to touch them because it's blood and violence. So let's read the story.
We
We're
gotta write that
reading
spec script.
Exodus. That's what we could do. That's our new.
I told you.
So the angel of God, who was going before the Israelite army, is this the same angel that killed the firstborns? Is it the angel of death, or is it a different angel?
We should have asked for
I
ID.
don't know. Going before the Israelite army, moved and went behind them, and the pillar of cloud moved from in front of them and took its place behind them. It came between the army of Egypt and the army of Israel. And so the cloud was there with the darkness, and it lit up the night. One did not come near the other all night. I mean, of course you should make a movie. Look at these visuals. It's incredible.
It's incredible.
Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. The Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night and turned the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. The Israelites went into the sea on dry ground, the waters forming a wall for them on their right and on their left. The Egyptians pursued and went into the sea after them, all of Pharaoh's horses and chariots and chariot drivers. At the morning watch, the Lord in the pillar of fire and cloud looked down upon the Egyptian army and threw the Egyptian army into panic. He clogged their chariot wheels so that they turned with difficulty. The Egyptians said, "Let us flee from the Israelites, for the Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, so that the water may come back upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots and chariot drivers." So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at dawn the sea returned to its normal depth as the Egyptians fled before it. The Lord tossed the Egyptians into the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the chariot drivers. The entire army of Pharaoh that had followed them into the sea, not one of them remained. But the Israelites walked on dry ground through the sea, the waters forming a wall for them on their right and on their left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Israel saw the great work that the Lord did against the Egyptians. So the people feared the Lord and believed in the Lord and in his servant, Moses. Word of God, word of life.
Word of a lot of death.
Yeah.
It's an easy enough one to preach. Good news.
Easy.
God kills Egyptians. Are you an
Enough.
Egyptian?
Easy enough one to, so it's a vigil reading. Vigil.
It's a lot of
reading.
imagery. You know, sometimes I complain.
Yeah.
Not complaining about imagery this week.
There's a real, I mean, I'm sure, I know we've talked about this like several times in this podcast because it shows up both in the lectionary and at the vigil. So, I mean, first thing to notice, like before we get to all the death, is that, yeah, it is a great story. So like if you're at that vigil and you got those great like storytelling moments, this is definitely one of them. It's one of the 4 that you're not supposed to skip, and for good reason, because it's just a really good story. Incredible imagery, really fun story to tell in so many ways. The death seems, you know, what struck me this time is that the death seems consistent with the rest of this Exodus story, where it feels like God could have solved this issue like much faster. Like God could have gotten them free like really quick, but instead there's this like, there's a plague, and then and then God hardens Pharaoh's heart, and then there's another plague. And then this whole thing, then we're gonna drag the Egyptians are gonna keep coming, and then we're gonna drown them in this. Like this thing got dragged out way longer than it seems like it needed to be. But it seems consistent with the rest of the liberation narrative. And I wonder what that's, not just that people died, but it's so consistent along this narrative of liberation. And it's the core liberation narrative that we have in our scriptures. What do you do with that piece of things?
Oh, that's good. Man, that's good. I mean, for me, I think I see this as a vocation text, which is a part of how I most recently have experienced the visual text in a really immersive, transformative way, is when we did them as a part of our discernment program with college students, trying to look at these visual stories as what can you learn from this story about how to figure out your life. And what I think is helpful and affirming and that I would pull out of this as good news is the lack of clarity in this story. That the Israelites follow a pillar of cloud and smoke on the way out. That's what we're seeing, right? Like they follow that up to the Red Sea. So it's in front of them. And then we have this movement where it moves around behind them. So first to say, the thing that you're looking for is enveloped in clouds. Follow the uncertainty, follow the mystery. And then I'd lift up, things have gotten better. We got rain this week, Matt, and we needed rain. Our state was on fire. We've been talking about it. And even though the fires were hundreds of miles away from here, the places where I live, the Front Range was just very smoky. So smoky that sometimes, here's the thing, you couldn't see the mountains. And where I live, Matt, the mountains are always in the west. So you always can know where you are because you can always see the mountains and know where they are and know where you are. And so one of the silly weather jokes that people were making, like, I don't know which way is which now because I can't see the mountains. There's something to that, right? That even this pillar of cloud and smoke becomes an unreliable leader because it moves around to behind them. It doesn't even stay in one place, this thing, but it is this invitation that uncertainty, cloudiness, the kinds of stuff that we the first segment of the podcast, we talked about wrestling with trying to figure out what it means to be the church these days. Is not a sign that you're doing things wrong. It's a sign that you're doing the right things, that you're following, you're moving further into the cloudiness, asking why, immersing yourself in the mystery. That is this God who acts in these very strange ways that don't make sense, that could have been much clearer. If God's got to commit to locusts and frogs and killing children and moving the oceans. I just finished watching Watchmen. Teleportation would have been really easy. Dr. Manhattan could have done this much cleaner.
Mm-hmm.
They would have been a little nauseous at the end when they got there, but storytellers have much more efficient ways to do this.
Yeah. And it feels like a truer way to describe what life is like. Like this just is how it works, whether it's your discovery of your own vocation or movements for social justice and liberation, communal movements, like always take time and have crazy numbers of setbacks, and you face off against opponents that sow the seeds of their own destruction, and it doesn't even make any sense why they're doing these things, and yet that just is how it happens. And so to have the narrative acknowledge that in some way, it does feel truer than a narrative that would be cleaner, but would feel less real.
Yeah. For sure. I mean, it even gets kind of muddy, which I kind of like. Like I'm seeing when it says that the chariots, the Egyptian chariots, the wheels turn with the difficulty and the chaos, right? They get stuck in the mud, and I think they're still on the way. I mean, you can't get around the fact that God does kill all these Egyptians, but
yeah. I wonder how you get. I don't know. There's probably different ways of dealing with that, but I think. I mean, I feel like you could argue that our understanding of God has changed since that. I feel like you could probably take some of that tack, but there is just also this whole air of mystery, like you say. But I think it's at a certain point we're not even arguing with whether the text should say these things, but whether like this is actually how the world is, and so you can wrestle with that like Jacob at the riverside. But
I mean, it gets even muddier. You can redeem the Egyptians a bit and say that they're super flat characters because God makes the confusion happen, right? Like God makes them do this stuff. But then you're in a whole
Yeah.
new cloudy, messy. Uh,
Yeah.
Wait, so God could like makes the evildoers to do evil? Because that sucks.
Yeah, it's super. I just don't think you're ever like, if you're, do not take up in your sermon, why did God do this thing? Right? Like,
Yeah.
I feel like, right, like you're not going anywhere there. But I do feel like there's something about just acknowledging the reality that we live in. So I'll say two things, and then we should probably move to the gospel. But one is, so we are used to doing a Seder meal at St. Mark's on Monday, Thursday. Yes, please don't write into me and tell me all the reasons why those are wrong. This is just what my African descent community has done for a really long time. But one of the pieces of that is there's an acknowledgement of the death of the Egyptians and this mourning, even for your enemies. And that's always been I always find that to be a powerful moment. So that's sort of in the midst of that as well. So we can read the story and also still acknowledge the death of the enemies in the story. But then also this idea that like, this just is how the world is. So I don't know if this will be profound or not, but I've been watching a lot of Sesame Street, Zach. And since I don't, the new Sesame Streets, they're fine, but I wanted my girls to experience the mid-'80s Sesame Streets that I grew up with. Unfortunately, HBO has them all ready for you. So we've been watching a lot of them. And this morning we watched Goodbye, Mr. Hooper, perhaps the most famous Sesame Street episode where they deal with Mr. Hooper's death, right? With his death. And it's like this but it really is quite amazing how they deal with this without really bringing in any spirituality, right? Too often we use spirituality to like wrap it up in an bow, and they're just like very matter of fact and clear, definitely emotional, but just this is the thing that happened. And Big Bird says at the end, why? Like, why did this have to happen? And Gordon calls back to this earlier moment where Big Bird was like being silly, and he was like, why are you doing this thing? And he's like, just because. And so Gordon tells Big Bird, he goes, why does he have to die? Why do people have to die? And he says, just because, like, this is just how it is. Which, if I was in a philosophy class, I would find that incredibly unsatisfying. Like, if I was a freshman in college writing my paper, I'd find that incredibly unsatisfying. And yet today, as a 39-year-old, I'm like, no, actually, like, that is probably more satisfying than like some like bizarre answer that I concocted to make myself feel better. But to just say, no, actually, like, this is the way that it is. Like, this is the way that these things unfold in our individual lives and in our communal lives. So thanks, Big Bird.
Well, fortunately, over here in the gospel, Matt, we have a parable that doesn't in any way paint God as a perpetrator of evil or destruction or torture.
Great. Excellent.
So we're getting pretty deep into Matthew now. Peter came and said to Jesus, Lord, if another member of the church sins against me, how often should I forgive? As many as 7 times? And Jesus said to him, not 7 times, but I tell you, 70 times 7 times. I think it's a math problem. If you're looking, it's 77 times. If you've heard a preacher explain some Greek stuff, they've probably explained this to you, that like saying 70 times 7 or 77 times is basically like saying, I tell you, infinity plus 1. N plus 1. For this reason, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his slaves. And now it says slaves here, and that sounds strange, right? Like, based on my U.S. 1609 understanding of slavery, I don't think I'd ever heard the story of a slave owner settling accounts with slaves. But here, Robert Molina, my friends with the social science commentary of the Gospels, say that the word being used for slave here is doulos, which can be servant or slaves, and that their translation says servants, and kind of like a bureaucratic, kind of like your secretary, like if you were the president, the secretary of Homeland Security, or some other position that a wealthy person has bought, would be the better way to understand it. And so maybe servants is better here. And so when he began the reckoning, one who owed him 10,000 talents, and now a talent, Matt, we all know this, you know this, everybody in your church knows it. 1 talent is equal to 6,000 denarii. and everybody knows how much that is. But a denarii, again, we all know this, is about 1 day's labor. So 6,000 days labor, about 5 years worth of manual labor is what is owed him. 10,000 talents. That's also an astronomical number. Excuse me. Yeah, that's an astronomical number. Infinity plus one amounts of dollars. And as he could not pay it because it's not a real number, his Lord ordered him to be sold together with his wife and children and all his possessions and payment to be made. And so the servant fell on his knees before him, saying, "Have patience with me, and I will pay you everything." And out of pity for him, Matt, out of pity here is one of our favorite words here on the podcast. Of course, that is that he was moved in his guts.
What?
Slagokumai, zomai, slagokomazomai. He is moved inside of himself with compassion, really deeply moved. The Lord, that servant, releases him and forgives the debt. But that same servant, as he went out, he came across one of his fellow bureaucrats who owed him 100 denarii. 100 days of work, that's a lot, but it's a real number, it's an integer. And went ahead and seized him by the throat, as I've done to anybody who owes me money. Pay what you owe. In the words of Saint Rihanna, bitch better have my money. Then his fellow bureaucrat fell down and pleaded with him, "Have patience with me." You need to note here, he's saying the exact same words, "and I will pay you. Have patience, have patience." But he refused, and he went and threw him into prison until he would pay the debt. When his fellow bureaucrats saw what had happened to him, they were greatly distressed, and they went and reported to their Lord all that had taken place. And the Lord summoned him and said to him, "You wicked slave, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me. Should you not have had mercy? Should you have not taken pity on your fellow slave as I had mercy, as I took pity on you?" And in his anger, the Lord handed him over, here you go, to be tortured until he would pay his entire debt. Matt, we've learned a lot more about torture since the ancient Near East. It's not an effective way to get the truth. Also not an effective way to get someone to pay you an incomprehensible amount of money. So my heavenly Father will also do to every one of you. Every one of you. Not going to skip. There's not going to be any angel of death Old Testament stuff. No blood on the door. No skipping. If you do not forgive your brother or sister in your cardia, in your heart. There's a little bit, it's not quite true, like a one-for-one translation here, handed him over to be tortured. It's handed him over to the jailers, but specifically it are the people in the jail responsible for torture, because torture was a part of the judicial process. In the ancient Near East, it was a way to get evidence. You just tortured people until they told you what you needed to know. Just like in Watchmen.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely torture. I probably wouldn't go with the torture angle here. It's pretty hard to wring some good news out of that. But I'm going to go with the debt one. I think would be good and interesting, and perhaps timely, in a way to preach about this pandemic that's not maybe hitting the same notes over and over again. They get called, debtor gets used as a noun here. And here's the thing. The only other time it's used in the Gospel of Matthew is in the Lord's Prayer, forgive your debts, as others have forgiven you. And it's only used 3 times in the gospel altogether. It's 1 time in Luke. But here's the thing. Jesus doesn't talk about debt very much, right? And when he addresses it, he always says, forgive it, right? Anytime there's a debt, Jesus says, what God wants you to do is to forgive that debt, right? So forgive sins, forgive debts in your Lord's Prayer. And then the other one, they asked him about these Galileans whose blood Pilate had mingled with their sacrifices. And he asked them, do you think because of these Galileans suffer, they were worse debtors than all the other Galileans? It's not a big deal to Jesus. And here, clearly, Jesus is saying, doesn't matter what the debt is. And this is not, it's a parable. You can read a lot of things into it, but they're talking about money right here. This is money talk,
Right.
Sure,
Yeah.
there's a second or third level where you can read non-monetary things into it, but this is a story about money. And there's a guy who owes more than he could ever repay. And Jesus says, no, you just forgive him. there is.
Could we
few that are-
apply this verse to student loans? Does this apply to student loans?
to student loans, to any like to any debt? There's nothing. There are few things more shameful in our society than like bankruptcy, right? Personal bankruptcy is like that's what's going to crush you. I mean, that's the thing.
I mean,
I would be most
unless
scared
you're the
of.
president. Then
Yes, obviously.
you're-
The one thing the president and this podcast can agree on is you should just forgive debts. We're a little more pluralistic in our perspective on this than he is, but
Mhm.
you know, I mean, you've got like your Dave Ramsey's, the success of your Dave Ramsey's and stuff is because of how the connection I want to make as I finish with this text is Robert Molina read this is all about honor and shame. You know, and that sin here is with honor and shame and stuff. And when you think about societal shame, for me, the connection is so clearly with debt and all the shame that goes with debt and being financially irresponsible. Because in our society, if you're financially irresponsible, you're a bad person, like you're untrustworthy. There's so worth just lifting that up, but then also that just unequivocal good news that like Jesus just says, forgive it.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, when you bring up honor and shame, I feel like this is something that I've come to see more honor and shame dynamics in our society in recent years than I ever saw before. Like 10 years ago, I would have been like, how do we even relate to this honor shame society? And now I'm like, oh no, we definitely have issues with shame, like all over the map, right? And so much the problem is like our inability to deal with that. And I feel like part of it is like, I mean, like you said, like there's clear good news at the end of it, but in order to get to that good news, you have to like acknowledge the reality. You have to acknowledge the fact that there's debt involved, right? Like, so like the brutality of this text, it's almost like, again, it's a parable. So I don't know how it all lines up, but I feel like there is something about like, you don't get to the other side of that, like that release until you've like dealt with the brutality of what's causing all the shame, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know how that all adds up, like in a neat equal sign way, but I think there is some dynamic of like we've got to figure out how to deal with our shame, and there's beautiful good news at the end of that, but not until we've dealt with.
I wonder if you could rewrite
you
that
know.
Robin DiAngelo book as White Shame.
Right?
Right?
Totally. Right?
I mean, I think
absolutely
that might be a more, I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe I won't say it. Like if that'd be more helpful
Right.
than people don't want to be told
Right.
they're fragile, but
right.
um,
Right. And because we refuse to deal with it, we have so few tools. Like once you're like, okay, I'm willing to deal with it, and you look around and like nobody else is giving you any tools. Yeah. It makes a text like this seem
here
possibly
is
relevant.
not just like with that honor shame deal, it's restoration to community. It makes the community whole again, which for whatever third or fourth journey through Matthew this year continues to be an emphasis. A thing that sticks out to me is how concerned Jesus and Matthew is about the wholeness of the community. We talked about it with the sheep a lot and the coins. But the issue, you could read this parable. One of the ways to read it is to read all of these broken relationships into it, that these are all the ways that the community is broken, and forgiveness is forgiving debt is how you make this community whole. And that's what Jesus cares about much more than Jesus cares about financial responsibility.
Yeah. Amen.
And so you're not going to make a society whole until you forgive, right? Forgive the debt, which first, of course, requires acknowledgement that there is a debt.
I mean, that's why there's like two stories here, right? Because like the first slave or servant can't acknowledge that he has any like, you know, it's like I feel like that second story is a huge piece of it. Like there is this acknowledging your own complicity piece.
I mean, in today's world, like in oh God, I almost said like the words I hate to hear in a preacher. In today's world, you generalize the culture like that. But I could see very easily where he like he'd be the hero, you know, if he could get away with it. That like, I got him to let me slide with my bankruptcy, and then I hit this guy up and I got my cash, right? Like he's playing the system. We love playing like Wolf of Wall Street, this thing, you know. He's just day trading.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Speaking of, this episode is brought to you by Robinhood. Would you like to get started in day trading? Would you like a puffy vest? Visit Robinhood.com.
No.
Promo code usury. Matt, what are you listening to?
I'm gonna throw out 3 songs with no explanation. Or very little explanation. Black Pumas. I'm really into Black Pumas right now. I'm ready. They had a new single. Chris Stapleton has a new single called Starting Over. I love Chris Stapleton. Saw him at Coachella one time. Maybe someday that'll happen again. And still loving the Killers album, When I Ran 10 Miles, Zach. I know that's like just a morning stroll for you.
I have not run
But
10
for me-
miles in years.
For me, that was a milestone. And it was bookended by listening to that Killers album and that kickoff track, My Own Soul's Warning. Just so gives that extra little energy boost. It's good. So some good music out right now.
There is, Matt. A couple new albums out this week. The Ava Brothers have dropped the Gleam Volume 3, which is their third installation of the Gleam albums. I really like them. They're like the most stripped down versions and harmonizing, kind of like what I think of as like the true Ava Brothers sound. So I'm going to put I Go to My Heart. It talks about what you do when you have nothing. It's a really pretty song. Josh Ritter, Lutheran fan favorite, who's never been on this podcast despite her invitations, has a new album out as well. I'm going to go with Miles Away. It's kind of where the Israelites and the Egyptians find themselves. Then I've been listening to Rumors, the Fleetwood Mac album. I've been doing the TikTok, Matt. I'm talking about getting off social media, but I've been doing TikTok because that doesn't count. And there's a really good TikTok account where this young woman just tells story after story about Fleetwood Mac and recording the Rumors album and how insane it was, because like it's just the height of like they're all in relationships with each other and hate each other, but they're having to sing these songs about how much the other person hates them, or like I'm sleeping with another person in the band. Like it's insane. And I can only imagine that the Israelites walk to the other shore, they step on dry ground, they watch the sea close, and then Fleetwood Mac sings Never Going Back Again, because we'll never go back to Egypt. We've never been slaves to anyone. Matt, you surprised me this week. You surprised me. I thought for sure we would get something off of the Kendrick Lamar Black Panther album.
Oh, yeah. I should have. We didn't even talk about that.
I know.
Didn't even talk about that. I know. We should have. It was in one of our Living Lutheran articles.
Chadwick went to high school right next in Anderson, South Carolina, at T.L. Hanna, which is right next to Clemson University.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Cool.
Mm-hmm. Well, Matt, I believe you got a Synod meeting you got to get to. It's really important that you're fully present.
It's going to be great. Looking
I'm
forward
going to go
to
make
it.
some, roll up some empanadas.
Sweet. Good luck.
Good app.
You should do some TikToks while you make empanadas. I'd like to.
I have not made any TikToks yet, but I got to get I got to find a student. Students are kind of halfway in and out on TikTok right now. I've got some that are really into it, but
Well, when TikTok became the sponsor of the Bill Simmons podcast this week, I really could. Well, every time he was like, TikTok, check it out. Like, I was like, what? How is this the sponsor? I don't understand what's happening. Oh, maybe they'll sponsor us. It's been real, Zach. It's been real.
Real vinyl. There we go. We recorded it. We're still live.
Still live.